All right. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Saurabh, and appreciate you all joining today for Salesforce Security Best Practices, the ANZ edition. So, thank you for our friends from Australia and New Zealand who are joining us, and folks from India, US, and rest of the world who are joining us. Hi, hello, good morning, afternoon, evening from wherever you're joining. So, let's get this thing running as soon as I can. All right. Let's start with the disclaimer. This is not legal advice. We are going to cover a lot of topics. Some of them do get into regulatory compliance type requirements, but this is not legal advice. This is not Salesforce's point of view. And this is just specifically our personal opinions and point of view based on our interaction with a vast majority of Salesforce customers, partners, and Salesforce itself.
Excuse
Everything
me,
you
Scott.
see.
Just letting you know, we can't see any screens, mate.
Oh, all right. Thank you for mentioning that tiny little detail. Uh, All right. Hopefully it works better now
Yep,
in
there we go.
seconds. All right. My apologies for that snafu. So yes, this is not legal advice, not Salesforce's perspective, just our point of view. Everything we are providing in this document and elsewhere is for informational purposes only. So with that out of the way, let's get a little bit into this. My name is Saurabh Gupta. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Compliance. We are a Salesforce App Exchange ISV partner, and we are focused on data retention, masking, portability, and right to be forgotten. I spent about 7.5 years at Salesforce, where I was an enterprise architect. From a background, I have a background in design. I enjoy solving problems, and I'm based in Chicago, where it is significantly cold. There are some of the logos of our customers, and you can check us out on cloudcompliance.app. With that out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to my friend Doug. Doug, take it away, please.
Thank you, Saurabh, and good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody. Pleased to meet you, and looking forward to presenting today. It should be great. As Saurabh, I'm also ex Salesforce. I've had my business now for a couple of years. I'm an enterprise architect. I write some blogs about security, and what I'm here to do today is hopefully share some information with you to help you understand a little bit more about how you can secure your data inside of Salesforce. Over to you for the next slide, please, Saurabh. What we're going to be doing is covering a little bit about what type of data we're going to be talking about, and then I'll be covering off securing your org with application security and a little bit of the data security, and then Saurabh will be finishing off around the rest of data security and the AI chat GPT stuff. So that'll be quite intriguing, I think, because everyone is now very focused on what the large language model can do for you. So if we can move on, please. Now, everyone keep asking me, why is security important? Well, just before anyone notices, well, we will be putting this deck up onto the same post, and also the recording be up there as well. So you can get a copy of that. And please ask questions by posting onto the LinkedIn document as well. That way we can actually answer them during the session. So back to the show. Sorry about that. Why is security important, and what data is at risk? There's been quite a few hacks in Australia and New Zealand over recent times, and both of the privacy commissioners have got together and really sorted out what they're trying to do to make the privacy reforms much more secure, and also make for larger penalties for people who do actually have breaches. So security is very important, not only to keep your data safe and obviously stop having a breach, but if you do have a breach, it's going to be costly nowadays, which is not great. So what data is at risk? Well, it's every bit of data you have in Salesforce. And most of you are using Salesforce to do some quite amazing things. And a lot of you have a lot of data within inside your Salesforce environment that's very important to keep secure. So without further ado, let's move on and talk about how we can keep your data safe. It's really a 4-step process. It's not that difficult, but it never stops, because you should always be assessing your org health, then securing your app, then securing your data, improving security awareness and understanding about what features are available and what capabilities you should be leveraging, and then rinse and repeat. Keep doing that circle forevermore, because every release Salesforce does, there's always new capabilities coming down the pipe. The health check and the optimizer get updated, and you'll see more information in those. We'll talk a little bit about them soon. So with the next slide, we're talking a little bit more around the actual org health and how can you do this. It's to cover off with some standard features that Salesforce has for you. So the first three are standard Salesforce capabilities: the health check, the portal health check, and the Salesforce optimizer. So please don't disregard these products. They're very powerful and you should be using them all the time, especially after you do a release into your production environment, but also after Salesforce does a release, because as I said, they update this capability every time and you may have some more interesting information in there. One of the most important things to worry about for your org health is your sharing rules around public data. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on. Now, a bit of a plug for myself here. Accessing your org health is what I do. I do assessments for customers all around the world, not-for-profits, fins companies, health companies, lots of different environments, lots of different size companies, and they all get a really detailed report containing exactly what I find in relationship to what I think is best practice inside your Salesforce environment. And you can then choose to change settings to make it more secure, or at least you can leave it where it is, understand that you now know why I thought it was an issue. And moving on from here, the next thing we're looking at is how to secure your app. Now, everybody should have multi-factor authentication enabled. Salesforce turned it on for everybody a little while ago, but if you have turned it off manually or you've got the Wave MFA setting turned on, please don't do that, because MFA is the only thing stopping hackers who get username and password credentials off the internet from logging into your version of Salesforce and getting all the data out. So always have MFA enabled, or Lightning Login, which doesn't even need a password. It's just your username and the app on your phone, the Salesforce Authenticator. You could also look at using corporate IP addresses to limit access to your corporate IP, which means you can only get into your version of Salesforce from your corporate IP address, which means that you need to be on a VPN into your corporate environment to actually access your version of Salesforce. It's another layer of security which can definitely help. Now, if you don't want to have a VPN or you don't have one, you could also use certificate-based authentication, where each laptop has a certificate which will authenticate that user directly into Salesforce, which means you've got to have that laptop and you've got to be able to get onto that laptop to actually access your Salesforce environment. And with the next part of the system, you can also look at the next slide, please, Saurabh. So with the configuration, I talked a little bit about sharing being one of the major things I find, and that's totally true. The number of findings where I have customers who have got public read-write access for external users is remarkable. More than half of my customers who have communities or Salesforce digital experiences have got their sharing set up incorrectly. Basically, any external sharing should always be private unless there's a remarkably good idea and reason behind it, and your security people have approved it. Just try and remove the view setup if you can, because it just lets people get into parts of Salesforce where they really shouldn't be poking around. It's where things like credentials are stored, et cetera, and you really shouldn't be letting people get in there unless they really have a valid reason for doing so. The API access control is a feature that Salesforce has, which is not enabled by default. You need to have Salesforce turn that on for you, and then you can enable it, which means all connected apps have to be approved before they can connect. At present, without API access control, every user can connect any connected app to Salesforce. So you can go to dataloader.io and connect straight in, and they can then access all the data that they're allowed to see and pull that out of Salesforce, and you won't know anything about it. So having API access control and controlling your connected apps is a very strong way to protect your application from data leakage. And people who've got view all data or export reports, those types of things should be looked at as well, because people that view all data can obviously see all data. And that's something you want to try and avoid if you can, because you try to keep your data as restricted as possible to minimize impact if that particular user is breached. And lastly, limit the number of system admins you have. If you've got 25, 30, 40 employees, you probably only need 2 or 3 system admins. And these system admins should not be third-party externals. You may need a third-party external to log in as system admin occasionally. That's fine. Just deactivate their account when not being used. So have a few system admins and make sure that any third parties are always locked out until you need to let them in again. So the next part we're talking about is going to be integration. And the first one is actually very important. The number of times I find that integration is done with a user that is a system administrator is remarkable. And this is a really bad idea. And actually, I've got a blog up to reasons why. Basically, a system administrator has got privileges that allow them to lock users out and to extract all the data in the environment. So if you have an integration from company X into Salesforce and you've given them permissions using a system administrator profile, they're able to lock all of your users out, extract all of your data, and that's it. It's perfectly legitimate to do that because you've given them that permission. So you should be using the new Salesforce license. I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But you should use a separate user for each integration because that way you can minimize what access that user has to your Salesforce data. And you should make it as small as possible. If you've got integration that allows for having access to just the accounts information and just the account name, for example, the account name and maybe a value like an internal identifier. If that's all it needs, then just give that integration access to the account with read and just those two fields. And that way it just makes sure that particular integration can't compromise the rest of your system. And if possible, if you're in control of the client application, and you should be looking to use the JWT or JOT OAuth flows, because they are the most secure ways of integrating into Salesforce versus a username password. The next one, please, Sorab, because we're talking now about the Salesforce integration user. Everyone was given 5 of these licenses free last year. And if you need to buy more of them, they're only about 120 US each per year, which is remarkably good value. And there's a really good blog, which will document it in some free documentation, which you'll be getting after the session. And it really discusses how you can use these free licenses or low-cost licenses to make your integrations much more secure, because now you're not having to spend a lot of money to have a separate user for each particular integration. You have this new user type, and you just use that and away you go. Next one, please. And when we get to securing your application, what you should be looking at here is looking at your code, because the code that you have in your environment is written by a human and therefore could have mistakes in it. So you can run the Checkmarks app or Salesforce's own scanner. There's a link there to those tools. And you should really be looking for things like SOQL injections or stored cross-site scripting. These two are probably the most important ones to look at, but obviously there are other findings which you should take into account as well. But those two I find are probably the most important ones, where those two could cause the most damage and extract information from your environment. And the next slide covers off a bit more around how you can protect your application information with the product that Salesforce sells to you. This is an extra feature. It's not included out of the box. The event monitoring capability allows you to know exactly what your employees, your partners, and your customers are doing inside your Salesforce environment. So internal users and external users. It also gives you good information about how's your system performing, or if you're having any issues like long-running transactions, or if you have Apex exceptions that aren't being caught. All of this is documented for you in the event monitoring environment. And also it can tell you exactly which pages of your system your users are using, which gives you a good idea on what is actually being used. So you can determine, should you scrap some parts of your system to make it better by removing technical debt. Now, the best feature of event monitoring, in my opinion, is transaction security policies. This capability allows you to block users from exporting your customer list, for example. Now, my customers who have event monitoring and my transaction security policies, they have a capability whereby they can say, you can export any report you like in the system, as long as you don't have PII information on it, personally identifiable information, or private health information. So if you have PII or PHI, you can't export the report. Other than that, go for your life, because those things are what we're really worried about. Now, if you're storing passport numbers or things to that effect, and I hope you're not, and if you are, you should be really looking after them. But if you do have passport numbers inside your Salesforce environment, what you should be looking to do with these is make it so you can't even put them on a report. And transaction security policies can do that as well. It's a very capable feature. And without it, you've got no idea what your people are using or what they're doing, what reports they're running, what API calls they're making. You've got no idea what's happening inside your Salesforce environment. And you can't stop people from exporting data that they can have access to. So it's very important to actually have this set up in your environment to make your Salesforce org as safe as possible. Just buying it won't help. You've got to configure it and actually have some policies in place that are secure. Without that, it's not going to help. But I find that event monitoring is one of the best spends that you can do for your security money inside a Salesforce environment. And with the next slide, we're going to be discussing a little bit more around the cost and value of data, because over time, the value of your data will go away. And this is where people often forget that it has a risk to keeping it. And Saurabh's going to cover this off in more detail. But basically what you should be looking to do is minimize the access to old data in your environment. Because after a period of time, the data doesn't give you value anymore. If you liaised with a customer, you got a lead in 2013, and you had a couple of email conversations and nothing went forward, why are you keeping that information? It's over 10 years old and it's not adding any value to you, but it's actually a risk, because if it gets compromised, you're going to be in trouble. And it takes up space as well. So why not get rid of it? And Saurabh's now going to cover off what you should be doing with this and adding some value to this. So after you, Saurabh, please.
Thank you so much, Doug. And thanks, everyone. I think, as you saw, security is not one and done, and it's not just one aspect of it, right? We spend a lot of time thinking about application security, and you have your Salesforce CRM, you have communities or Experience Cloud, you may have other interactions with it. And that's one fundamental area that a lot of organizations think about. The other part, which interestingly does not get that much coverage, is around data. And when you think about data, you're looking at two aspects of it: data that's in my production systems and data in my sandbox. So let's cover a little bit of production first, and then we will jump into the sandbox portion. As Doug mentioned, you can see on this graph here, right, the value just dramatically decreases. But I cannot tell you the number of customers I have come across when I was at Salesforce, and even after that at Cloud Compliance, where they have years and years of data that's just sitting around. These are old leads that may never buy from you again. And these may be old cases that closed 3, 4, 5 years ago and really don't bring any value. But they do bring significant amount of risk. They do bring significant amount of cost in terms of storage, in terms of sandbox refreshes, in terms of all the other aspects of it. And they also bring a lot of compliance and regulatory burden. There are regulations, particularly in GDPR, in CPRA, and some of the new laws that are coming out of Australia, India, China, and other places, which are specific about how much information can you keep. You have to have an information policy and retain retention based on that. So with that in mind, let's dive a little bit deeper into this. You want to secure your production data, and fundamentally it boils down to really commonsensical ideas. To begin with, collect less, collect only what you need. The urge to fill our plate at a buffet is a bad idea when it comes to customer data. You want to have a regular removal so that you're pruning your database and keeping it really good and usable. And you obviously always want to secure it. So when we think about these things, really the first one, collecting less, is a business mindset change. There's not a lot of technology that you can apply, but it's something that as thought leaders in your organization or for your clients, you can advise them on. They need to have a really good reason why we are constantly bringing up information that may not be of much use. And then in terms of securing it in your production, you want to look at data retention. You can automate this. You may have a manual thing, but it's a really great idea to have a retention policy and enforce it. A lot of customers automate it so that it's a very standardized thing. And now there are legal and compliance reasons to do it. This can get you into fines and troubles. So you definitely want to have retention. The other aspect that's definitely worth acknowledging is Doug mentioned Shield platform encryption and Doug mentioned transaction logging. And one of the other things is Shield platform encryption, which we'll talk about. And then there is this new risk, right, on the horizon, which is AI. We are all excited about it. but it does bring its own set of challenges because now I am going to send my customer information out on some other infrastructure for processing. So we'll talk about that in the production side, and then what can you do on the sandbox? So let's move on. This is the challenge for every organization in the world today. It doesn't matter what industry you are in, what size you are, what region of the world you are in, whether you use Sales Cloud, Service Cloud, nonprofit, health, automobile, telco, it doesn't matter. Regardless of what you use, some version of this problem exists everywhere. You've got stuff in production, you're not taking it out. You've got full copy, you're multiplying it there. You have partial copy, you're multiplying it there. You have 10, 20, 30 sandboxes, which we are just giving out to anybody who comes in, a contractor, a developer, a third party consulting company, a tester, and you're giving them sandboxes. And those also contain data that can be confidential. And we'll jump into that in a little bit. But this is the scope of problem. What we think is one record, what we think is some 100,000 case records or a couple of million old records is not just that. It is the proliferation of it across the board, which makes it super hard. Maybe you'll secure your production. How do you ensure the same security across these sandboxes? How do you ensure the security across all these multitude of dev sandboxes? And that is the fundamental challenge for security people, for compliance folks, for legal folks in your organization. So one of the option is to automate data retention. Again, a plug for us. We are cloud compliance. We have an App Exchange product that's 100% native, and you can utilize it to create retention policies and basically run them and ensure that old cases, old leads, opportunities, old custom object, or manage object records, anything and everything, you're able to eliminate. You're able to delete them. You're able to obfuscate or mask them. So that's what you can do on your production side in addition to collecting less data. The second part of this is Shield. Very interesting. A Shield platform encryption is a very unique product in its own right. And I cannot tell you the number of times I've had this conversation where customers are like, which of these Shield components do I need? And do I need platform encryption? It's an excellent product for a very specific use case. So whether you have Shield or not, your folks who have access to Salesforce are able to look at data inside Salesforce, right? I have access to Salesforce and log in, I'll see information. Shield or no shield, it doesn't matter. Where Shield plays in Shield encryption is that it can encrypt data at the database level. So your information inside the Salesforce's massive multi-tenant database will be encrypted if you use Shield encryption. And Shield platform encryption gives you the choice of managing your own encryption key. This is significantly important for organizations that want to do this because they're doing it for very specific contractual or legal requirements. Maybe you're a bank in the United States and FINRA has a regulation that says you've got to keep this data encrypted at rest. And that's why you're using it. Maybe you're healthcare, nonprofit, travel agency, I don't know. Whatever industry you are in, there are specific requirements for which you are doing it, right? Because the risk it's really addressing is if someone somehow got into one of these super secure Salesforce data centers and was able to get into some Salesforce database, that sort of a matrix-like risk, I think is highly unlikely. So the number one reason you want to consider shielded platform encryption is this legal contractual requirement where you have to make sure. And there's really no other product like this. So hope this is useful. Let's jump into the other part of this, which is the risk that this will not address. Your data is still going into full copy sandboxes. Your data is still visible to all those people who have a legitimate access to this data. This is back to what Doug was talking about in terms of integration, in terms of giving just a significant amount of access to people who may not need it. Those folks can always, those applications can always access data, whether you have Shield or not. That risk is not addressed here. All right. So then let's talk about this new kid on the block. When again, with production data, we now have ChatGPT and everybody's looking at how can they leverage it, whether it's with AI Cloud or your own solution or App Exchange offerings, or your users may just be copying information out of Salesforce, pasting it in ChatGPT on their $20 license, and they may just be doing this, right? And this is a legit risk. There's a huge business value in terms of writing emails, summarizing information, brainstorming with ChatGPT, and a lot of other things you can do. But it does come with its own set of risks because It is a consumer facing application. So this is from their website, which we literally just got pasted in here today. So it was updated yesterday. So if you're on a ChatGPT Plus or their free plan, you basically have to explicitly opt out. Otherwise, the information that you're pasting there can be used for training their content. And in a number of businesses, that is not an acceptable use of their customer data. Their customers have not consented to this. So this is one of those leaks that may be happening right now, and you may have all kind of controls, but someone may be doing it. And the way to eliminate this is to actually offer them a better, secure AI integration with Salesforce that they can leverage. So that is one of the areas that we have worked in. We have found that what you want is this sort of an architecture. Oops. So you want to make sure that information going from Salesforce is going through a multi-layered masking. We do that. We have an app exchange product called GPT-5 that lets you do that. And essentially it makes sure that any data that you have annotated as confidential or sensitive is kept inside Salesforce. We mask it and send it out, and we send it to your AI instance. So you can control both sides of this and have 100% control on this. And whether you use this or some other approach, fundamentally, that's the idea. The idea is you want to withhold information from AI that is confidential, that is PII, personal information, health information, something about your customers, partners, products that you don't want to share with the world at large or with a third party AI model. We have this product on App Exchange. If you'd like to try it out, it is in a freemium model, so you can actually deploy it for free in your production. Reach out to us and we'll be happy to set you up with this. All right. Now let's talk about sandboxes. We talked about some of the production systems. Now we get into the other aspect of it, unproliferated access of data in sandboxes that unfortunately happens way more times than we may think about it. So if you look at data in your sandbox, it comprises of these categories. You have business data, which may be sensitive, who you sell to. Maybe you sell to military, maybe you sell to disadvantaged individuals, you sell in areas, you want to keep that information confidential, right? It is material non-public information, as it's called. You also have unstructured and other kind of data. Maybe it's emails, maybe it's PDFs, maybe it's other kind of things which have sensitive and confidential data. You, of course, probably have personal data, which may be beyond emails and phone numbers and gender orientations and passport numbers and driver's license and whatever else based on the kind of business you are in. You may have commercial data, what you sell your product for, those kind of pricing strategies, which are business and sensitive. And from a competitive perspective, you want to keep them within the walls of your Salesforce. And you have config setting and other metadata, which is IT security sensitive. So when you create a full or a partial copy sandbox, all of these category of data is replicated, right? You have this information that's going out to all of those people who have access to these full and partial copy sandboxes. Depending on their level of access there, they are looking at this category of information. In addition, if you just give someone a Dev or Dev Pro sandbox, they are still getting some of this information. They're getting all of the user data that's in a Dev or Dev Pro. They're getting products, they're getting pricing, they're getting your config setting and other metadata that Doug was talking about. So that is the scope of risk when you think about sandbox data. And you can address this risk by masking this data. And the way to do it is twofold. You can do it manually, or you can use a solution. We do data masking. You can get our solution from App Exchange. Salesforce has data mask, does the same thing. And those are your sort of choices. And basically what these things do is data masker runs and it will mask information that you tell it to mask so that your first names, last names, a lot of that kind of information is masked into gibberish, or it's masked into specific sample data that you want to generate through this. So those are your options. You can also delete a significant amount of data that you don't have good reasons to put in your sandboxes. So that's how you can secure your sandboxes. Here is the example of what it does. Here is a view of the listing. You can check us out on App Exchange if you like. So this brings us to the last part of it, and also one of the weak links, if you will, right? Our end users. we are living in a world where the threat of social engineering is going to increase significantly more with all of the chat GPT type things. Even in our company, we get so many people, we get text messages from people who will be like, hey, I'm Saurabh, I'm talking with a customer. Can you buy some Apple gift card and send me? I want to send. They will figure out from LinkedIn who your organization is, who the people are, and they will try to find every possible way to get information out of your organization. So it is imperative, if you are in an organization, if you can influence this, make sure that security awareness training is mandatory. In our organization, it is, right? You want to make sure that these are behaviors that we reinforce. If there is password sharing, you want to make sure there is a secure password sharing app that your organization is using. If it's possible to use a single sign on, if it's possible to use an impersonation software, make sure they're using that, right? You want to make it not boring and you want to reinforce this behavior. A great way to do that is Trailhead badges. There is a bunch of them that talk about what kind of things your organization can. And it's not just end user or business users. There is the development team risk also, where they can bring more secure code practices as part of their software delivery and release. You can also do this with third parties that are doing development for you. So consulting companies, offshore partners that you may have. You can make sure that there is an internal process and you can set up a meeting and you have a review for release notes for security features. We know when releases happen for Salesforce, you can set up a meeting for a month before that. So your technology folks, business folks are looking at those release notes, figuring out what can we do better? How can we write more secure code? A very simple example is to apply a with security for SOCL statement. So essentially you want to reel in any sort of unabated access that's happening today through development, and you want to make sure that accidents and oops from an end user perspective are eliminated or minimized as much as possible. So that is on the security and awareness front. What we will do is we'll share a link that has we'll share a link to a PDF that has all of the content that we talked about. Doug and I worked quite a bit to put together a lot of tools, most of them free, and a lot of other resources that you can benefit from. Someone from my team will put the link here in this LinkedIn comment, and we will also share it with people who registered for this webinar. So that's great. Before I get into Q&A, Doug, anything you want to add on whatever we've said so far?
I think, Saurabh, thank you very much for a great overview there. I think the interesting thing that we talk about is that it definitely is a never forget. Just keep doing the loop, do 1, 2, 3, 4, and it'll make your life so much easier.
Absolutely. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Q&A. Doug, there was a question on permission sets, and I
Yes,
was
there
wondering.
was. Yep, no worries. I'll take that one. With the permission set question, it's about the fact that Salesforce is going to be removing profiles. Sorry, not removing profiles. They're removing and object access rules from profiles and putting them into some permission sets. This is going to be happening in a couple of years' time. So it's not tomorrow, but it will happen soon. And it's a really good time for you to think about what your security is really up for. So understanding exactly what permissions you're giving people and what they're willing to have to do their job. And the good thing about permission sets is you can have permission set groups. You can also have permission sets that will unwind other permissions. So you can have a very powerful setup with just a few profiles, and then have a couple of permission sets out there. One of the things you should be looking at is using a persona-based approach. So if your company sells widgets, you've probably got back office people, you've got salespeople, you've got sales managers, you've got support people, and you've got people in the shipping department. That's 5 different personas, and they should have their own access to data. Now, salespeople and sales managers are probably going to be very similar. So you might be able to do that with a permission set for the sales users and then a permission set on top just for the sales manager that adds a little bit extra. So the capabilities of these tools are very powerful. Salesforce has done a lot of work to actually make permission sets much more flexible. And under the covers, actually profiles are stored in permission sets now anyway. But the profile itself will be keeping things like page layouts, your default record types, and a few other bits and pieces but the majority of what you should be doing is moving all of your object access and all of your security attributes, like your can you do view all data and that type of thing. Those settings should be stored in your permission sets. And it's probably a good time to have a good look at what you have today, understand what you should be moving to in the future. Other than that, there's not really that much to cover off, except if you're not quite sure about how you should be using permission sets, in the PDF that Saurabh talked about and was sharing with you, there's a great video stream from Salesforce, which has about, I think, 10 to 12 different videos explaining exactly who can see what and why in Salesforce. And it goes through all of that sort of stuff with permission sets, etc., explaining how it all works. A very capable thing.
I totally agree. And thank you for taking that question. I remember the time when permission sets were, when profiles were just all over the place. Organizations would have hundreds of profile, and it was a nightmare to figure out who's doing what kind of access, who has. And it just used to be like such a huge security risk. I think permission sets make this really granular. You can apply expiration to it. You can bring a lot of really interesting flexibility to do this. But Doug, I agree with what you're saying. I think persona based is such a good way to look at it. In a lot of organizations, what's unfortunate is that security tends to be an afterthought, right? We are in this hurry of release, new feature, and that makes it harder for security to be emphasized and treated as a very important thing. Granted, certain sectors, this does not apply, but I think in general, one of the areas that organizations can benefit from immensely is really increasing the sort of business importance and posture of security at large. When you look at integrated systems like Salesforce, there's so much of your business and processes and customer data that's running through it that it was never a better time than today to definitely lock it down, whether it's on the application, the proof, the data, the AI, the training, all of these aspects, these four areas that you're looking at. One of the other question, Doug, that someone has asked, Sandeep has asked, is around the CSP mode in Lightning Locker service. It's a pretty big question. I don't know if you got a chance to read it and if you want to react to it. Sandeep, the sense I get is this question seems very specific to something. And from what I'm hearing is it's already been acknowledged. And I think there is some work that's happening on it per your comment. So I think we'd probably have to leave it at that. What I do is the part that you're asking, which is how do we know in these kind of situations and how do we address them proactively? So really, and for the benefit of everyone on the call, a little bit of context is Sandeep is saying that they found some quirk that prevented them from using Lightning Locker services in a secure way. And I think that's probably an exception more than the norm. The one of the things that is my screen not visible? Doug, are you able to see my screen?
I can see you. I think it's actually my screen, unfortunately. My camera's gone off. I'm not quite sure what happened.
Oh, okay, no worries. All right, I'm gonna share it again. Is this working now? Hopefully. So one of the things that I've seen is that a lot of these, given how complex our systems have become in the CRM world and the sheer amount of sophistication that organizations have driven in, you do tend to run into these one-off things every now and then. And oftentimes it's just even hard to figure out where is this happening from. And I think it is important for a lot of technologists, a lot of people who are helping drive this forward to think about how do we proactively address them? And security is one of those areas. And I think from a technology and development perspective, I find that a number of times the answer to this is a joint approach with either Salesforce and the community at large. If you are on the Slack Ohana group, if you are on one of the Trailblazer communities, if you are on with Salesforce support, you may find a lot of different ways that some of these areas can be addressed. Doug, is there anything you want to add to this?
Yeah, with Sandeep, thank you for asking the question. Unfortunately, I'm not a really deep Lightning Web Component developer, so I can't really answer it in detail. However, the thing which I would strongly suggest is just make sure that your sharing model for external users is private for everything.
Hmm.
And then only expand it with sharing rules if it's an absolutely necessary reason to do. The only reason I can think of having a public access for an external object would be maybe knowledge base. We're going to start having an open knowledge base that everyone can read. But in general, every other object, in my opinion, should be private unless there's an amazingly good reason for making it not private. Now, obviously, with Lightning Web Components, there's some interesting challenges with the thing you found, obviously, which is being fixed, which is fantastic. But other than that, I don't really have much to add. So my apologies, saying that probably best to ask this in a hardcore Lightning Web Component developer community.
I would agree. I think that's a great call out. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions. Anything else, Doug, that you think would be useful for the audience here for you to share? Particularly, I know Australia had some regulatory changes and some new laws have come in, and since a lot of people are joining from Australia, is there anything that you can talk about that may be useful for this audience?
Yes, there's both Australia and New Zealand. I know we have people from Bangkok and a few other folks as well, and even people from the UK joined, which is fantastic. Thank you for that. But one of the things with the policy changes happening in Australia for the Privacy Act, it's going to mean that every company is now liable to the Privacy Act. In the past, if you didn't do more than $10 million turnover Australian, you needed to, sorry, start again. If you had more than $10 million in turnover, you had to comply with the Privacy Act. Now, with the new Privacy Act, which isn't in law yet, but it will be coming out, it will be everybody from myself, which is a one-man band, right the way up to huge corporations. So just be aware that everyone has to be compliant with that. And actually, we've got another question here coming from Keto Hire. Is there any Salesforce inbuilt option to avoid cross-site scripting or socket injection attacks? Yes, if you're using standard Salesforce point-and-click development, so if you're using just regular screen layouts and using standard Salesforce objects and components on your Lightning web pages, they are covered for cross-site scripting and socket injection. Salesforce covers that for you by default. It's only when you start writing custom code or building different user interfaces yourself, that's when you've got to worry about socket injection and cross-site scripting, because if you don't escape the data coming out of the database, you could have a bad person could put JavaScript in that, and then it would pop back into your browser and actually it'd run that code. And then with socket injection, you could type in as part of your query, you could put a single quote and put and blah, 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 and actually have it do more things than you expected. So with Salesforce, they give you capabilities in the language to actually help you prevent them, like escaping single quotes, for example. So you should be using those if you're a developer to protect. But if you're not a developer, if you're an admin who just uses standard Salesforce UI, the cross-site scripting and socket injection is taken care of it for you by Salesforce.
That's a great call out, Doug. Another question from Jesse, which I think is just right down your alley, is what do people typically do with event monitoring logs? Will Salesforce store them for you, or do you need to store them off platform? Any insights into how far can you go back if there's an incident out of box?
No worries. Great question. With event monitoring logs, they start as soon as you buy the product. So you can't go backwards. It's only from now on. And for your real-time events, you need to actually enable them as well. So without enabling them, you won't get any logs at all. So you need to make sure you turn all your logging on after you buy event monitoring, and then it will just work, which is great. Now, Salesforce will delete your logs after a period of time. Depending upon which log type you have, it's either 30 days or 6 months. And what you should be doing is exporting them and keeping them safe somewhere. Another general plug for myself, I actually have a tool which will back up all your event logs and keep them somewhere safe. Tools that normally back up your data and metadata don't normally back up your event logs at all. So if you've got a backup tool for your Salesforce environment, and thank you for having one because you need one, they more than likely won't back up your log files. Now, the log files are very important to keep because that way you can do a forensic investigation to see exactly what happened. So let's say, for example, one of your employees leaves the business. You want to make sure that they didn't do something dodgy before they left. You should have your policies in place to stop them doing anything, but having a general look around, see what they were doing isn't a bad idea. And unless you put your log somewhere safe, you can't do that. Couple of points. When you buy event monitoring, you've got to enable all the logging. Secondly, you've got to get some proper policies in place. And thirdly, you need also to back up your log files and keep them somewhere safe. There are other tools out there that actually will absorb all these log files and give you some really good insight into what's going on. I'd still advise you to back up your logs and keep them yourself anyway, because that way you can do your own queries upon them and actually get access to it. And people like myself and Sorab could look at these logs for you and actually give you a lot of good guidance around what's happening inside your environment and give you some pointers on what you should be looking at.
That was well put, Doug. I think this was really useful. I actually did not realize that you cannot back those with conventional backup tools. I thought it would just be really easy to do it that way. That's very interesting to know. I did not know that. One of the other areas I think we didn't get a chance to talk about, but may be useful for this audience, is around DevOps. If you're doing DevOps and if you're doing continuous integration and continuous deployment in those sort of CI/CD environments, it's really important to make sure that this is a bit of a detour from shield lock. So if you're doing DevOps and you have these environments where you're deploying code very regularly, you want to make sure that your sandboxes are optimized for metadata migration and code migration, things like that. And what that means is for some of the customers, what I've seen is they want to have this very streamlined, right? Like full copy gets refreshed, your data kind of moves in, and you're doing all of this. And one of the challenge there from a security standpoint is you may be doing this against unmasked sandboxes, which have real data. And if you have code that's going to fire off emails or something like that, you run the risk of actually sending your emails to real customers. One of the things that I got to mention earlier was when you're looking at sandboxes, it's not just that you have people who have access to real production data. That could definitely be a vulnerability or a risk. But the other aspect of that is you may be running code here that is still not production ready. That's the point of sandboxes, right? And in that sort of environment, you may have a script that misfires. You may have an automation that just triggers off. And lo and behold, you just sent out 15,000 email to people who have no idea why they got that email. So it's those kind of risks that back to securing your data and securing your application that I've seen come up, and they just, a lot of customers get caught, are blindsided when something like this happens. All right. I am not seeing any other questions. Doug, anything else from your perspective that's worth sharing? Any tidbits?
I think actually, Saurabh, following on from your point about CI/CD and having your own process flow to move your builds from your sandbox environments into production, there are a couple of really good products out there that do that sort of thing for you. And most of them also have hooks into third-party scanning tools. So I mentioned earlier, you should be scanning your code yourself before you put it to production. Well, these tools also normally have adapters for scanning tools as well. So they can be incorporated into your process flow. And for example, you could build it in a case whereby when it hits a certain number of issues, it won't let you promote any code. So if you've got any severity 0 or severity 1, you can't release the code. If it's severity 2, you've got less than 3 of them, you can release the code, for example. But the point is having code scanning built into your CI/CD process is something I highly recommend. And even having a CI/CD process is also very important as well for complex environments, because it really makes it a lot simpler for you to make sure that what you're deploying is what's actually in your test environment. If you're using change sets, it's too easy to miss something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do hope that a lot of organizations are starting to move away from chain sets, but it still surprises me how many still have it. I I do like your call out for code scanners, and obviously you can use what Salesforce provides. There's security scanner, or you can get third party. There's a bunch of them on App Exchange that you can leverage. So definitely worth looking at in terms of making sure that code that's getting deployed in production is safe and secure. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions, Doug, and I think then we are coming to the end of this. Any last words, Doug, on this before we close for the day?
No, just like to say thank you everybody for coming along. Really appreciate your time. Please download the PDF. The link is actually in the comments below. One of Saurabh's team actually put that link in there for you. please download, have a read. There's some great content in there to help you keep your data safe inside of Salesforce. And a lot of it's free, which is fantastic because there's a lot of stuff out there, but unless you know where to look for it, it's a bit hard to find. So Saurabh and I have got together and we've got a whole bunch of information that hopefully that will give you a good head start on keeping your environment safe. If you need any further, if you think of a question after we finish the show, please just comment on the post and mention myself or Saurabh, and we'll get back to you with any answers that we can. Other than that, let's thank you very much and hand it back to you, Saurabh.
Absolutely. Great call out, Doug. Yes, the PDF is a lot of very valuable resources. So definitely leverage that. And as Doug mentioned, please do reach out to us if you have any questions on anything we talked about, the services that Platinum 7 offers for security assessment, or if you're looking at data masking, data retention, bringing AI securely into your organization. Those are things that my team and my company spends a lot of time on with a lot of complex customers all around the world. So with that, thank you so much for your time today. Have a great rest of the day or have a great evening, depending on where you are. Take care.
Thank you. Goodbye.